Now, if you recall on thatch, we went over, I don't know how many papers went on thatch. And the conclusion of all those thatch papers was thatch is a problem for water penetration. It's a problem for turf quality and so forth through various issues with water and light. If it develops too much, if there's too much thatch. And thatch is a result of lignous materials, stolons and rhizomes, and the lignaceous components of turfgrass building up quicker than they're breaking down. The lignin is the problem, and it's very difficult to break down. It's only broken down by a handful of white rot fungi, apparently. And so products generally don't do much to thatch because of the difficulty in breaking down lignin. Even mechanical aeration and verticutting and vertical raking and top dressing, even those sometimes don't help. That's the most reliable method we have at the moment. The odds are good that that's the best solution, the best management practice, are those cultural practices for controlling thatch. But even those are hit and miss depending on how bad the thatch is and what turfgrass it is and so forth. So all in a nutshell, thatch is difficult to control. We've never really figured it out for sure. You should do this. Okay. And the website, Earthworks Turf, I think it is called. I can't remember. The company's Earthworks. They have this 2-minute Turf Talk video on thatch, and I missed it somehow. So I wanted to go over it. Let's see if they have some sort of magical cure for thatch that escaped science. So let's listen to it and see what he has to say.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joel Simmons for another 2-minute Turf Talk.
So for those of you who don't know, Joel Simmons is the founder of Earthworks. He's an evidence denier. He's a magical ratio guy. He used to teach at Rutgers somehow. He taught the second year, 2-year turfgrass soils class, the 2-year degree program. He taught the second year soils class there. And I want to say 2005, 6, 7, something like that. He was, by his own acknowledgement, fired from Rutgers for teaching a lot of non-evidence-based information. So kudos to Rutgers for not allowing people to teach information that is not based on evidence. Our students who come out need to get the best information they can based upon the best evidence there is. And if there's information being taught that is not evidence-based in an accredited university, that's not a good thing. So he was let go by Rutgers by his own acknowledgement because he taught base saturation. He's into all this magical ratio numbers and calcium, magnesium, and all sorts of natural organic stuff. So he denies all the evidence that refutes his position when it comes to base saturation and all sorts of other things. So that's who Joel Simmons is. So as we get started, if you don't know, that's Joel.
You ever wondered where thatch comes from? Thatch is directly related to an imbalanced carbon to nitrogen ratio in the soil.
Okay, so there's one claim. So thatch is directly related to carbon nitrogen ratio in the soil. No evidence. He I don't know if he's ever provided any evidence for any of his claims, but he's not going to provide any evidence in this video for that. We didn't show any evidence. I didn't show any evidence about carbon to nitrogen ratios in the soil having a direct relationship to thatch development. Thatch development is a result, oftentimes, but not always, oftentimes a result of, well, it is a result of the lignaceous materials being developed at a rate faster than they degrade, really. And what enhances that is the application of excessive applications of any form of nitrogen. If you're really pushing the system such that it's growing tissue faster than it breaks down, then you're going to, in some cases, develop thatch. Although there's some literature that shows that doesn't happen. Some literature shows it does happen. I'm willing to accept that, excessive amounts of any form of nitrogen will likely result in excessive thatch. But the carbon to nitrogen ratio in the soil, I'm not aware of any evidence that supports that, and he's not going to show any of it. So it's just one claim he's just pulling out of thin air.
And when carbon to nitrogen ratios are imbalanced, The plant grows extensively, the root system grows extensively in the soil, and microbes don't have enough food energy in order to digest them down into humus.
So there's another claim. He's claiming that there's not enough food for the microbes to grow and break this thatch down. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not here to say it's not true. I'm just here to say that I'm not convinced that it is true. Microbes are going to get their food one way or the other. And whether or not they have enough to break down thatch is another issue. There's only certain types of microbes that can break down thatch to any meaningful extent. At least that's my understanding. And so his thought is that the carbon to nitrogen ratio is imbalanced to the point where there's not enough soluble carbon to enhance or inflate the population of microbes to break down the thatch. And again, could be true, could not be true. But if you're not providing any evidence, there's no reason to believe it.
So what we want to do is make sure that we have balanced the nitrification cycle and have adequate amounts of carbon in that soil, available carbon, so that when we do apply nitrogen, the system isn't just growing and growing without checks and balances.
If you want to know, there's a couple of key phrases that you can tell someone's not a soil scientist, at least not a traditionally trained soil scientist. One of them is available nutrients, available nitrogen, like a soil test. Let's say you take a soil test and they say, well, this is available potassium. That's a key sign that they're not a soil scientist when they're saying that. Not that they need to be a soil scientist, but you just know you're speaking to someone when they say that doesn't understand soils in a traditional sense like a soil scientist would. And so when he says available carbon, soil scientists don't use that term. Not in like it doesn't mean anything to me really. Available carbon. What we use is soluble organic carbon. It's usually acronym is SOC. Soluble organic carbon is what we use when we're writing or speaking or we're comparing things or whatever. We're not worried. We would never say available carbon or available phosphorus. We would say extractable phosphorus or soluble phosphorus or exchange, something like that. We wouldn't say available phosphorus, available carbon. So that's a key phrase that not to say he's wrong because he says it. It's just that when someone says something like that to a soil scientist like myself, those are little indicators. Like it's like, well, he might not know what he's talking about. Then I hear another one, carbon nitrogen ratio. There's all these little phrases that go off in my mind. It's like, I don't think he's really a soil scientist. He's probably just regurgitating key points from some resource that he read or something. I don't know, but I don't think he's a soil scientist. I think he has a master's degree. I'm not sure if he has a PhD.
When there is adequate carbon in the soil, when there's food sources for microbes, they work very aggressively. And one of the things that they're going to do is digest that lignous carbon material that is root systems, and that is thatch.
Well, microbes do break down thatch. I mean, obviously there's microbes that break down thatch in soils, or else there'd be, 20 meters of thatch out there because none of it ever broke down over history. But he conflates like microbes need to grow and break down thatch. I don't know if he's intending to do it. He's not all microbes break down thatch. There's only a certain portion or certain fraction of microbes that can do that, and that is the microbes that can tear apart the lignin, break down the lignin. That's from my understanding from the conversations I've had with scientists who are specialists who are on this channel. By the way, you can go back and look at those videos if you haven't seen them already.
So thatch is directly related to the overuse of synthetic nitrogen.
So he just just slipped that right in there, right? So it was directly related to the carbon nitrogen ratio. Now it's directly related to the overuse of synthetic nitrogen, not overuse of nitrogen, overuse of synthetic nitrogen. Okay. And one reason why he has to say that is because, and he may have said it so many times at this point he actually believes it, but he has to say that because he sells natural organic products. He's not, if the only thing people needed was nitrogen, synthetic nitrogen, he'd be out of business because the only thing people would be buying would be synthetic nitrogen sources. They wouldn't be buying all this other stuff. So he has to have some sort of hook or catch or niche in the market to, get his products in there. And so why not paint synthetic nitrogen as the bad guy. So overuse, it's the overuse of synthetic nitrogen that's causing the problem, according to Joel Simmons.
Not that there's anything wrong with using synthetic nitrogen,
No.
but we have been hearing too much in this industry recently of all you need is nitrogen.
Yeah, I know. It's funny how that works whenever people follow the evidence. When people follow the evidence and follow the science, it tends to result in people applying basically nitrogen. There's a reason why the population stayed basically at the same rate until after World War II. Okay. The Haber-Bosch process created so much ammunition, so much explosives, they didn't know what to do with it after World War II. So they ended up using it as fertilizer. And that's when the food growth just exploded per acre. Food per acre just absolutely went bananas. And the population followed because of synthetic nitrogen. There's been natural organic nitrogen used for 6, 7, 8,000 years. They used to think it was like 4,000 years, but here recently there's been some evidence to indicate that it could go back as far as 8,000 years. Natural organic fertilizers. And no one's saying they don't work. Natural organic fertilizers will result in increased growths for sure. But it wasn't until the Haber-Bosch process where we were able to synthesize nitrogen out of the air, where food and growth in plants and human populations just really exploded. There's a very, very compelling case that the Haber-Bosch process was directly resulted in the explosion of the human population, and even today is responsible for the dietary needs of potentially half of the world population. There's a very, very strong case to make that it's the half the people alive today are alive today because of synthetic nitrogen synthesized from air via the Haber-Bosch process. So don't paint synthetic nitrogen like it's a big problem and it's the world's worst thing. Overuse of synthetic nitrogen is going to result in all this stuff. Overuse of any nitrogen is going to result in excess growth of any plant. It doesn't have to be synthetic. Even the natural organic nitrogen sources are going to break down into inorganic nitrogen, ammonium and nitrate, and be taken up by the plant. All of it has to be inorganic in order to be taken up by the plant. So he doesn't say overuse of nitrogen. He says overuse of synthetic nitrogen. Okay. I got a kick out of that when I first heard it.
Well,
by the way, I just saw this morning. I didn't even know this existed until this morning. Like I have to go over this video.
All you have in your program is nitrogen. You will be growing an adequate amount of thatch.
I think he misspoke there. I'm not going to hammer him too hard on that. When you say if you're only applying nitrogen, you will be growing an adequate amount of thatch. Oh yeah, I agree. I have no problem with that whatsoever. I think he meant to say excessive amount of thatch, because an adequate amount of thatch is actually very, very helpful. I mean, some thatch is beneficial. So I'm pretty sure he meant to say excessive. So I'm not going to hit him too bad on that, because I make mistakes when I'm speaking and stuff too as well. I don't realize I say the wrong word sometimes, but I think he's saying excessive thatch, because adequate thatch is not a problem.
So how do we get rid of thatch?
So here comes the hook. Now you guys know we went over thatch for a month and I was pulling my hair. I don't even have any hair left. And whatever I have left, I'm pulling it out because I can't stand going over thatch. That was torture for me for that month. Okay. It was not easy. Now, like I've said before, I learned a tremendous amount and I'm very happy I did it. And looking in hindsight, I'm happy I did it. But man, that was tough. Woo, that was not easy. But for that month, how do we get rid of thatch? There is no silver bullet to thatch. I mean, if you say aerification, well, there's cases where it doesn't work. If you say top dressing, there's cases where that doesn't work. If you say verticutting, there's cases where that doesn't work. Okay, in general, there's a pretty good chance that one of those three will probably be beneficial. Okay, there's cases where they don't. But the odds are those management practices, if you're going to be a betting man, the odds are good that one of those is probably the direction to go. But in no case, other than lipase, the products that contain the enzyme lipase from white rot fungi, in no case do we ever see a consistent influence from applying carbon, applying sugars, applying microbes. That was never even we went over products back as far back, I think, as 72 or 67. I can't remember how far back we went, where they're applying molasses and sucrose and glucose and all sorts of soluble organic carbon sources, trying to figure out if they could hyperinflate the activity of microbes and break it down. And I think there might have been one case where in 1 year of one study, they saw a little blip on the radar where there might have been something happen. But consistently across the board, the consensus was that those products that contain these sugars and these are soluble organic carbons to do this didn't ever result in it. Does that mean his product's not going to do it? No, it doesn't. I don't know what his product's going to do. I just know that the body of evidence doesn't support any reason to believe that any application of an organic soluble carbon source would result in thatch reduction.
What we do is we get microbes to really work for us. Take a look at this picture. This is what I call the thatch cake. Here's a perfect example of a superintendent that used a lot of urea and then top dressed and did that year after year. And you can see a layer of thatch and a layer of sand.
No, well, wait a second. I thought you said the problem was excessive amounts of inorganic nitrogen. Let's go back and make sure we understood this correctly. Where was that at?
Adequate carbon in the soil when there's food sources for microbes. They work very aggressively, and one of the things that they're going to do is digest that lignous carbon material that is root systems, and that is thatch. So thatch is directly related to the overuse of synthetic nitrogen.
Synthetic, okay. So he caught himself. That was a good one. He said synthetic instead of inorganic. Because when you say...
and did that year after year.
This guy applied urea. So he said
Example
synthetic.
Of a superintendent that used a lot of urea.
Okay, so he caught himself. He used the right word. I can't say anything about it. Because urea is organic. Urea has carbon. I think it's like 20-something% carbon in it, soluble carbon. For every pound of nitrogen, I think you get a half a pound or 0.4 pounds of soluble carbon. If someone can run the math and post it in the chat, I can't remember. But something like that.
And then top dressed and did that year after year. And you can see a layer of thatch and a layer of sand. So the ideal thing here is to bring in some carbon, feed the microbes, get them as active as we possibly can, and get that system working so that there is digestion in that system. And the best way to do that is during aerification, get some aerification amendment.
So, I mean, it all sounds fine. It sounds great. For anybody that doesn't know, it sounds great. Well, get those microbes working as best we can, And get the microbes working and break it down. But when you have a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of fundamental understanding of the systems, this sort of stuff it's like water off a duck's back to me. It's like, yeah, okay. I heard that many times. I'm pretty familiar with the evidence. I don't see any evidence that would support that. But to the average person who might not know, you might get caught. You might get stuck in that, vortex of thinking, oh, well, that might work. And, that might do something because that makes sense. That's the availability heuristic, right? You think, well, that kind of springs to mind the easiest. That kind of makes sense. Let's do it. No evidence.
It's in there, like the Earthworks aerification program that can help break down thatch.
So there's another claim, Earthworks aerification program that can help break down thatch. Now I've looked at the label on both these products, this Micro Replenish and this Renovate Plus. I've looked at both of those. They're primarily, they're just derived from natural organic products. Like I think one's blood meal, one's feather meal or something, bone meal. They're just animal products. And then one Micro Replenish says carbon-based fertilizer with mycorrhiza. There's nothing in there that was even remotely convincing. I don't know what would be in there that would convince me in terms of granular because I'm not familiar. And that's all I'm going to go over on that video. I don't know of anything in the literature that says anything of convincing that would said anything convincing in the literature that would convince me. I mean that, oh yeah, this sort of, if a product contains this, then you're likely to see a result in reduction in whatever, Yeah, so I looked at those labels. There's no reason to believe it. And that's the key sort of to remember in a lot of these claims is that I'm not saying, I can't say it won't work because I'm a scientist and I can't ever prove a negative, right? We don't ever accept the null hypothesis. We either reject it or we fail to reject it. And I know that sounds like, I don't know. Well, I don't know what it sounds like. But sometimes time, my scientist friends, we have to have some sort of pragmatic approach to these things. I mean, pragmatically, I can say that's not going to work. None of that stuff's going to result in a reduction in thatch. Because, I mean, we have people out there just making this stuff up, pulling it out of thin air and convincing our clientele and our stakeholders and are taking our industry down a path that is not evidence-based. I know as scientists, it's hard to take those stands because you can't say it doesn't work, Travis. I know I can't say that as a scientist, but at some point we have to be able to have a pragmatic hat as well. And, as a scientist, I can't say it won't work. You're right. But I can say as a scientist, I'm not convinced it will work. And there's no good reason to believe that it will work. There's no good reason to believe this will work. Okay. And that's, as a scientist, I think we can at least go there. For those people, for those scientist friends of mine who don't feel comfortable saying it won't work. I get that. I understand that. But we can say there's no evidence to convince me that it will.